All right. Well, I think we should go ahead and get started. My name is Rachel Kozlowski. I am this year's president for PSSAC. I have been very strongly supported in putting together this meeting by Mary and Phil and Joel and Mike, and I can't thank everyone enough. But I'm just excited that we have this together and that we can see each other and connect, and we have some really great speakers this year. Really excited about that. I'm going to share my screen really quickly just to share the agenda. It was included in the registration announcement as well, but I just want to share it just to remind everyone of where we're at. So we'll begin with a talk from Dr. Asmeret Asefaw Berhe, and then we will also have another talk from Mike Sowers talking about water issues in Azerbaijan. We'll have a brief break where if you need to go get coffee or just stretch for a minute. And some of that, we left that time for a break that might get absorbed by our speakers, need a little extra time. After a break, Randy Riddle will be talking about the Salton Sea. After that, we'll move on to our annual business meeting, and Dave Smith will actually be giving us a preview of our trip for next year, which is very exciting. And then I'd also like to say that we recognize we may have a lot of participants who are not part of PSSAC. You're very welcome to stay with us for the annual meeting. Everyone is welcome, but of course you're not required. And feel free to jump off before that if needed. I'll just remind folks that you should keep your computer muted unless you need to ask a question, or if you need to ask a question, you can put it in the chat. And after our meeting, we will also have about 30 minutes to 45 minutes to however long we feel like talking. Just an open forum for people to talk and just see each other's faces. And I encourage you to stay for that. All right, I'm going to stop my share. I think everyone has joined, or we have quite a good list of people who've joined. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker. So Dr. Asmeret Asefaw Berhe is the director of the Office of Science for the Department of Energy, but you may know her from her 14 years that she spent as a professor at UC Merced. She's currently on leave from Merced while she works for the Department of Energy, but she is a professor of biogeochemistry, and she's also the Ted and Jan Velasco Chair of Earth Sciences and Geology. She has completed internationally recognized research looking at how soils, climate change, and political ecology intersect. And she's especially interested in how soil systems regulate climate and the relationship between the human environment and the natural environment. She's a fellow of both the American Geophysical Union and the Geological Society of America. She has far too many awards for me to list, but some of those include the Joanne Simpson Medal from AGU and the Bromley Award from GSA. She was also recognized by the National Academy of Science as a new voice in science. And she served as the chair for the Academy of Sciences for soil science. Dr. Berhe has also just been committed to broadening participation in geosciences, and she has been on the leadership board for the Earth Sciences Women's Network and was a founding leader of the Advanced Geo Partnership, which really works on empowering geoscientists to just build more inclusive workplace climates. She's just an inspirational voice for soil scientists nationally and for many young scientists coming up, including myself, and we're so excited to have her here. So without any further ado, Dr. Berhe.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that very kind introduction. I'm really excited to be here today and just can't wait to talk soil science, which is something I don't get to do quite a lot of these days, as you can imagine. Before going any further, though, I just want to say how honored I felt to receive your invitation, Rachel, and your patience throughout this process. It's been an interesting transition, and I really appreciate your patience. So as Rachel indicated, I'm on leave from my position at the University of California, Merced, to serve as the Department of Energy Office of Sciences Director. But I just want to say up front here that anything and everything that I'm talking about here is my opinion, and I don't necessarily speak on behalf of the Department of Energy or the Biden administration in this talk, because I'm very excited to talk to you all about work that we've been doing, things that have happened over the last several years, partly in my group, UC Merced, and collaborations, including the advanced geo work that Rachel mentioned. And I want us to start this conversation by thinking about the role of soils and climate change. I think we all here are on the same page in understanding that soil play important roles in carbon sequestration and moderating the Earth's climate. And when I talk about these issues, I try to, at least in my kind of research outputs from my group, I had try to center this conversation around how soil carbon sequestration, in particular, when it's coupled with efforts to restore degraded soils, can have a win-win benefit for both addressing issues of land degradation and climate change, and thereby ensuring food and nutritional security for the growing human population. I'm also going to share with you some work that has happened in my lab. It's actually stuff that's continuing with my students and postdocs that are still continuing this line of work on how do we think about the controls on soil carbon dynamics, but at the whole profile scale, instead of just focusing on the top 10 centimeters or 15 centimeters or whatever, but rather thinking about the entire soil profile. And I'm going to make this intro quick again, because we're among friends who are all on the same page on this topic. But when I normally talk about carbon sequestration, I like to remind folks that, you know, the soil system is one of the largest reservoirs of actively cycling carbon, and it stores obviously twice more carbon than the atmosphere and vegetation. And that should really mean that small change in the amount of carbon stored in soil, or the rate at which carbon enters and leaves the soil system, can have large implications for atmospheric processes. And I also like to remind folks that, yes, you know, the carbon storage in soil operates more like a bank. It's not super helpful to focus on necessarily how much carbon is there at any given time, but rather, especially from a sequestration perspective, rather we have a net higher rate of input of carbon into soil relative to outputs that are leaving the soil as a result of decomposition. So I've kind of tried to invoke this idea of a bank, and thinking about the bank account and your income arriving there at the beginning of the year, needing to pay the balances that you need to for your rent and food and all sorts of stuff, and then potentially stashing some of that income into long-term storage, akin to mineral associated carbon, for example, that could persist in soil for long periods of time, which is ultimately what we want to build if we really want to talk about long-term storage and persistence of carbon to help the climate system. And I've tried to frame this conversation along with a broader strategy, if you will, of the fact that, yes, we recognize the atmospheric concentration of CO2 has been building up. And where we are right now, if you look at the light blue parts past 1950, in the second part where the future is indicated. So if we look at where we're heading on that steep trajectory right now, right here, there's that steep trajectory, then basically what that says to me is that we have a future, we have a choice in where we want our future to go. We can continue in business as usual, potentially end up in very high concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, scenarios kind of unlike anything the world has seen in the last 100 million years ago or so, or we can end up or we can end up somewhere in the middle if we just choose to reduce emissions. So this middle road scenario, that yes, that will potentially address some of the challenge, but even that is unlike anything the world had seen in the last 20, 30 million years. If we really want to bend the curve, we then need to adopt sustainable approaches that will have to inevitably include climate smart ecosystem management in the mix. So we don't just have to reduce emissions if we want to achieve a healthier environment conditions and address the issue of climate change, but we also have to figure out ways to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. I.e. focus on negative emissions, which ultimately are ones that I mentioned can contribute to addressing the degradation of land too. And a recent paper that we compiled basically about the results that are out there about the potential and opportunities for carbon sequestration kind of clearly shows where this potential is in soil. As obviously you can see from this figure very clearly, large potential exists in forests. It's in particular when it involves reforestation of deforested landscape, when we can put in place natural forest management practices and even improve management of plantations. But there's still a significant amount of potential also in agricultural and grasslands, especially where we can practice cropland management practices that reduce the rates of tillage, depending on that soil that we're talking about, cover crops, proper management of irrigation and agricultural chemical input and others. All of those can also contribute upwards to 4 petagrams of CO2 equivalent per year sequestration. And of course, there's a significant potential in wetlands too. In fact, the highest potential rate of sequestration that could happen in wetlands. But considering the wetlands are geographically delineated into very small area, relatively speaking, in the kind of total area coverage for wetlands, then their overall contribution appears small, but obviously they can have very high rates of sequestration. And then I've tried to do in this work is then we've obviously done a lot of work in trying to clarify the science and synthesize the science and do some primary research, obviously, across multiple topics related to this. But I've also tried to couple this along with communicating this to stakeholders, communicating this to the wider science community, and even potentially trying to see if we can motivate some kids to love soil the way we do with cartoons and other things. And if you want to hear more about how I've spoken about these topics in this context, I will refer you to the TED Talk that's available on the TED website, and this comic that's actually freely available from my group's website, that the link of which was in the beginning, but it's I can refer to anybody there if that's helpful. Okay, coming back to the point of land degradation, I think it's extremely important that as we are advocating for carbon dioxide drawdown, carbon sequestration as part of a nature-based solutions for climate change, that we keep reinforcing the fact that soils around the world continue to be degraded, and that it should be alarming to everybody that upwards of 1/3 of the world's soils right now are considered degraded, and that their potential to support plant production, support our demand for food, feed, fiber, and even natural climate change solutions is compromised because of a variety of human actions that you could see on this map here. And I think it's extremely important because that degradation could potentially mean considerable loss of soil carbon in the future that could occur because of future degradation that could happen just within this century. And remember that that's in addition to the about 120 petagrams of carbon that has already been lost from the top 2 meters of soil because of human activities just in the last 12,000 years. In particular, a really fast rate of decomposition and loss that has occurred in the last 200 or so years, as was really nicely illustrated by a paper by Jan Senneman at PNAS a few years ago. And we've tried to build this into a further conversation around how soil carbon sequestration is central to so much of what we as a global community need to do to ensure equity and even planetary survivability. And this paper put in context basically how soil carbon sequestration is central to addressing the sustainable development goals that were laid out by UNDP, the UN Development Program for the world community that needs to achieve these goals by 2030. It's a very detailed paper, but I think it's helpful to speak about these things, not from a perspective of, not just from the perspective of how much money farmers can get for carbon sequestration, but rather how central it is for so many of these key ecosystem processes that we want to work, and that soil carbon sequestration, yes, it helps with climate change, but it is also bigger. The implication is way bigger from an ecosystem health and even planetary survivability. In the interest of time, I'll quickly move on from this topic and try to share with you some results from a specific group of studies that we've done in the central part of and the southern part, I should say, central and southern part of the Sierra Nevada, very close to Merced and moving upwards. So for these studies, we relied on the climal sequence that is represented on the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada. And then a lot of this work was part of the Southern Sierra Critical Zone Observatory that was led out of UC Merced for over a decade. Roger Bales being the lead PI that led that project for the entire time. It was funded by NSF. And so, as many of you are aware, the western slope of the Sierra Nevada is this beautiful study system, in my opinion, to demonstrate how climate in particular, and then the biological conditions that climate creates, influence soil conditions. So we took advantage of this system, trying to ask questions of, first of all, how deep are the soils? So if we were to account for the entire weathered soil profiles, A, B, and C, and find the boundary to the bedrock, basically the bedrock contact, how deep are the soils along this climate sequence? And when we do that, this is what we find. Obviously, as you can imagine, the mid-elevation where it's a sweet spot for considering climate, both precipitation and temperature conditions, it's a sweet spot for weathering. So you would expect very deep soils as deep as 10 meters, especially once you account for the weathered bedrock in the mid-elevation providence sites. And if we then collect samples from these entire depth profiles and analyze them, this is the amount of carbon that we recover across that same elevation sequence. So what you have right now is everything that is represented by A and B horizons is in the lighter shade of gray, and then the darker color is the weathered bedrock. And what you see clearly is that, yes, in the mid-elevation zone, just like there are deep soils, there's a lot of carbon also in those soils. Net primary productivity is also higher in the mid-elevation zone. But what we didn't expect, even though we really were trying to understand how deep soils store carbon, is that in the mid-elevation providence side, the third side, if you notice here, the amount of carbon stored in the weathered bedrock, though it is very low in concentration, it adds up. It adds up to a point where it's actually comparable to the total carbon stored in the lower elevation, the San Joaquin experimental range site that we had here, the lowest elevation site, which is an oak grassland, and even comparable to the highest elevation forest site, subalpine forest ecosystem that we had here, which suggested to us that if we're really going to understand how carbon storage occurs in soil, and we don't cover what deep soils are storing and how much carbon is actually stored in these deep soils, we're missing a big part of the story, because these carbon stored in these weathered bedrocks can account to almost close to 30% of the soil's total carbon storage. And when we did a statistical analysis to think about how what are the variables that most represent, explain the variability in carbon storage? It turned out it's precipitation, and more accurately, it's deep water percolation or precipitation minus evapotranspiration that actually explains a much higher proportion of the variability of carbon storage. Because as you can imagine, it's really ultimately the amount of water that is able to percolate down into the soil profile and facilitate weathering and other processes that can explain a significant amount of the carbon storage. And then we went ahead and did a number of spectroscopic analysis, but also did radiocarbon to figure out how persistent is this carbon. And what becomes really clear is that the carbon that is stored in these deep layers, it's not just, some carbon sits there and is cycled rather quickly or something like that. It's in fact some of the oldest carbon that the labs that we work with had ever analyzed. This point at around 5.5 meters in depth that we analyzed from the Providence site, for example, it looks like the carbon there is on average about 20,000 years old. Yes, age of carbon is a tricky topic to talk about, but it still means that once carbon is able to make it down the soil profile, either through water, dissolved transport with water, particulate movement within these very coarse soils, from roots and other microbial sources, once carbon finds itself in these deep layers, it tends to stick around for long periods of time. And when we did a very rough global extrapolation of, if we assume, based on climate and geology, the depth of soils, and in particular the thickness of weathered bedrock in soils around the world, we can expect somewhere on the order of about 200 gigatons of additional carbon that is potentially stored in sap rock that does not make it into our current accounting of carbon dynamics. And that has implications, because what this figure, which is a little bit busy, is showing is the mean residence time of carbon in the ecosystem. And it's showing it for these 4 different locations that I showed you, the same ones that I showed you before. But what it does here is, the first one shows you if you're trying to estimate mean residence time of carbon in green, but if you only used biomass, overstory biomass, as your measure of ecosystem scale mean residence time, you obviously arrive at a very different number compared to if you consider the O horizon, the O plus the A plus the B and the C horizons. And if you consider in every case, right, if you consider the amount of carbon that's stored in the entire soil profile, so the gray points here, in each case, you can have at least a double, if not an order of magnitude higher mean residence time of carbon in the ecosystem than you would if you missed out basically from looking deeper and digging deeper into the soil profile. This was also informed work that we did. It's actually, this one should be coming out very soon. This paper, this also informs basically our projections into the future of how we think ecosystem cycling of carbon is likely to respond to changes in climate. So what you see here is the increase in mean annual temperature in degrees average that is projected in these simulations, and then what corresponding percent change in projected warming that we could potentially see. And it then again shows you if we were trying to, so basically how that would influence the overstory carbon stock, soil stock, gross primary productivity, and mean residence time of ecosystem carbon. Again, if we use the correct information that includes the entire soil profile along with overstory, then we are able to see quite nicely how these projected changes in temperature are able to have very different degrees of change in ecosystem carbon cycling at different times, especially if you focus just on the right one. Sorry for rushing through that, but the idea here is the main message I wanted to send in this part is, yes, obviously soils regulate climate, but I think we would all do better if we could emphasize that soils also been victims of climate change and other human actions, and But if we do right by soil, soils also could offer powerful and cost-effective solutions for climate mitigation. And digging deeper, I think, is really critical for not just allowing us to know how much carbon is there accurately, but also so that we can predict vulnerability of terrestrial carbon storage. So in the next slides, I just want us to quickly talk about equity, which is a topic that's really important to me. I think it's really critical that we talk about equity because, first of all, we are a field that is central to so many of society's important needs, and our fields remain very not diverse, let's put it that way. But I think there's a really important moral case for why we should pursue that. And I think a first step in the pursuing that is also recognizing that the playing field has never really been level for people from different backgrounds in our communities. And if you need scholarly, kind of evidence for how the playing field hasn't been level for people from members of the majority communities versus minoritized communities, I will happily share this list with anyone who wants to. And one of the things that we've tried to do is highlight that we have to recognize that scientific training, in particular grad school and postdoc and early career for most people from minoritized communities, is more like a hostile obstacle course that people have to navigate to work through all of these things and a number of the barriers that cause the bias and discrepancy across the achievement gaps that we notice. And we've tried to argue that we should probably stop using terminologies such as a leaky pipeline to determine or to explain that people are leaving the field, because those are very passive terminologies that don't really explain what exactly is happening beyond just telling us numbers are changing. And we argue that it's extremely important, if we want to change the picture going forward, that we recognize where these barriers are and work to remove them. And I think that's extremely important because as part of the work that we did with Advanced Geo, we launched a survey of scientists across the broad fields of geosciences, including membership in Soil Science Society of America and Ecological Society of America, and others, to figure out what is the proportion of hostile workplace climates that people are experiencing, how frequent is it, and what impact is having. And just to focus on one question that we ask, when people say they've experienced hostile workplace behaviors, and we ask them, has that ever made you consider leaving the geosciences? And the response is staggering, because 50% of Black women and white non-binary respondents tell us yes, they've considered leaving the geosciences as a field and as a career because of the hostile workplace that they've experienced. And this is also true for a third of all the folks from across of these many different minoritized communities that you list here. And I say that because I truly believe that we all can play a role to change the dynamic here. We all can make sure that we play a positive role in making sure that we learn about, first of all, what bias looks like, how can we address it, how can we create equitable conditions in our own domains, address them, especially in terms of how they affect people's ability to do their work. We can be welcoming and mentoring and sponsoring scholars from all walks of life, and intentionally also seek to change leadership to reflect the membership of our communities, and even hold that leadership accountable so that we can change the trajectory going forward. I spoke a lot. I'll stop here. Hopefully we have a few minutes for questions. But I was just going to end by saying that a lot of the scientific work and even the equity work that I described was funded by these institutions, and it includes work with many collaborators. So I want to thank them all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Berhe. We have probably about 10 minutes or as long as you're willing to take questions.
Great. I just wanted to make sure to leave time for.
Yeah. If anyone has questions, you can use the raise hand function to ask a question, or you can type it in the chat. Let me get us on the all participants view so I can see. If no one has a question immediately to jump into, I actually was wondering, as you were going through the discussion of carbon sequestration in those sea horizon soils, and you're modeling for global carbon levels stored in those soils, I was wondering what characteristics of those deeper sea horizon soils might affect the ability of those soils to store carbon, and how did you take that into consideration in your model?
So this was, I should mention, that work that was led by folks, our collaborators in Davis, actually, UC Davis, Toby O'Gene and his group. It's a very, very back of the envelope that it's going to get estimation. So we're hoping somebody will actually be able to do a much more refined modeling work to show this. But for that particular work, what we did was basically consider the type of paramaterial, climate, and use those to basically give us an estimate of how deep the soils are. And then if we assume, based on what the results, then whether we could say take 5 meters being a reasonable depth, we had an estimate for potentially with large error terms accompanying it. So how much carbon could that account for? And then do again for different depths. But as I said, it's as back of the envelope as any of these calculations can ever get. But I think it just points to some really important potential that we have left out. And it's fair to mention here that it shouldn't be surprising, like that, that deep soils are prevalent. They exist a lot of places, and they could also store a significant amount of carbon, even if the concentrations are low. Obviously, there are extreme cases here. We've realized, for example, about a little over a decade ago now, when the circumpolar soil survey was conducted, and they actually went from 1 meter to 3 meters to look at how much carbon was stored in the circumpolar north soils. That almost, what is it, 40% or no, more like 60% increase in the carbon stored in soil was predicted because of that, right? So it shouldn't be a surprise that there's a lot of carbon that we're not looking in deep soils. I think we just need to figure out what's the right way that we can get a better estimate, right, of how much carbon stored in deep soils. And then based on mineralogy and climate and other things, then we can try to extrapolate, okay, how persistent is that likely to be? We were very surprised in a good way when we found the radiocarbon results, and spectroscopy showed also that some of this carbon, indeed, once it arrives there, it doesn't seem to have been seen a lot of transformation, at least decomposition facilitated transformation. It just sits there, partly because there's not a whole lot happening at that depth, obviously, right?
Thanks. If anybody has any other questions, like I said, stick your hand up. Otherwise,
I'll the question a hand out.
Oh, go ahead.
Hello, thanks so much for coming and speaking to us. This is really just amazing that you're here. I wanted to ask kind of a clarifying or maybe future research question. So what you looked at in terms of carbon was just at the organic carbon stocks, is that correct?
So in these soils, we're pretty confident there's no inorganic carbon. We've tested it, and we don't see any evidence that there is inorganic carbon. So we assume total carbon is equal to the organic carbon is equal to total carbon.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you.
I see we've got another hand raised, but unfortunately,
there's a David Smith with a hand up. Unfortunately, at least we got something to laugh about, right? Whoever your hand up. Oh, okay, go ahead.
Okay, do we have time?
Go ahead.
Okay, so my question had been, what about the wildfires? Are there carbon emissions perhaps swamping out the benefits of some of our conservation practices, or, relatively, what's the relative comparison there?
Yeah, so wildfire has actually been another line of research in my lab that we spent a lot of time thinking about. So what is very clear is that large, intensive wildfire regimes are very, very destructive in terms of carbon storage, both from a perspective of combustion of the above ground carbon, but even reducing carbon stocks at or near the soil surface. But lower frequency, lower intensity fires that are not highly destructive and not stand replacing kind of fires. My argument, and I have to see anything to prove that, to prove me otherwise so far, is that it probably is actually helpful for long-term carbon storage. There's many mechanisms that would explain that, right? Part of that is that, you know, the carbon that's converted into pyrogenic carbon during combustion, some of that carbon that's burned, it's able to stay in soil for long periods of time, potentially even facilitate higher rate of water and nutrient retention in soils that allow for that recovery of the ecosystem and continued carbon storage. There's all sorts of interesting dynamics also of that are caused by fire. But then again, I think there's a clear distinction to be made here between lower frequency, lower intensity fires versus these extremely destructive high intensity fires that we're seeing more and more of recently. Those very clearly terrible from a carbon storage perspective. So there's an interesting, I think, if you will, coupling of these kinds of deep. Maybe I'll back up and say that generally speaking, if wildfires don't affect deep soil carbon, right? But they may have long-term implications for weathering that would have consequence for at least the carbon that's stored, say, in the top 1-2 meters of soil. 2 meters is probably a stretch, but say the top 1 meters.
All right. I have a couple questions from the chat, 2 that are related. I'll try to combine, but what does VAJEDI and the extra M in STEM mean? And then going along with that as a question about representation is whether or not you know if what the general percentages are for non-white, non-male representation in the professional soil societies, if you have any information on that.
So I'll start with this one. Sorry, I might have run past this screen very, very quickly, but this acronym that NSF and others use, a lot of people refer to it as BAJEDI, is one that's meant to include that we're not just talking about diversity and equity, but we're actually also talking about belonging, access, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So that's the acronym that I use. Sorry if I run past this very quickly. So a few years ago in 2019, a number of us actually came together and wrote a paper on representation of women in soil science community. And then 2 years later, we followed it by a paper on race in soil science community. So if I will refer you to these papers for, so this one is the one that was published in Soil Science that had to do with racial representation in particular. This one talks about soil science community, but generally more in a commentary style. And then there's a third paper, Karen Vong et al. In 2019, also in Soil Science Society of America Journal, that talks about representation of women in soil science. If you haven't seen them, they're actually really good. They took a lot of effort to compile the data. Huge props to Karen Vong, soil scientist from Wyoming, and others in our team for compiling that information.
Thank you. And thank you so much for speaking with us and for having the extra time to answer questions. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Rachel. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.
Our next speaker is Mike Sowers. He'll be talking to us about solving water infiltration issues in Azerbaijan. Mike is the managing soil scientist at Valley Sciences and Engineering out of Visalia. He graduated from Delaware Valley University in agronomy and environmental science, and he is a certified professional soil scientist, as well as a certified crop advisor. He has over 30 years of experience working with land application of municipal and commercial processed wastewater in California, Washington, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and Maryland. He's also taught soil judging at Delaware University for the last 6 years and California State University, Fresno. We're very excited to have him here. And Mike, you can share your screen and you can take it from here.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you. Pleasure to be here and thank you for inviting me. Let's see. So I am, just as Rachel said, I'm a soil scientist for Valley Science and Engineering. And in 2019, I got a unique request by Valley. We are the largest center pivot manufacturers in the world. So all those little circles you see when you fly over country, I would hope that most of them are ours. So we do work internationally, and we do sell and install pivots all over the world. So I got a unique call in 2019 that we have some pivots over in Azerbaijan that gearboxes are failing. And of course, I'm a soil scientist. I'm not an engineer who designs gearboxes. What am I supposed to know about that? But they're having soil problems and they think they're related to the issue with gearboxes. So I said, okay, I'll try to see what I can do, and had a great chance of getting over there. So anyway, if you can all see my screen, Azerbaijan was established in 1991. It's a new country. It was part of the Soviet Union when it dissolved and broke apart. And what's really cool, the Azerbaijani government understood that if we need to feed ourselves and not be reliant on other people to feed us. So the Azerbaijani government gives a 40% rebate on agricultural capital costs. So that entices large corporations to come in and invest within agriculture within their borders. So where is Azerbaijan? Okay, it is right near the Iranian-Turkey border, just north of it, just east of the Caspian Sea. The Caspian Sea is the largest inland lake in the world. It is about 1/3 as salty as the ocean. So if you get indication on the salinity, that is what the Caspian Sea is. Azerbaijan is here where my mouse is, and my little grain farm that I needed to go out to was right about here. So my next slide is here. So this is the grain farm in 2017. You can see where my area is highlighted. We are sort of at the peak up here, and me being a soil scientist, the first thing I needed to know was what type of soils I'm dealing with. Where am I at? 5 soil forming actors. We have a low-lying area here that's mostly due to either lacustrine or alluvial type deposits. I didn't get a chance to go out there and map it or look, but just from the map, that's what I was dealing with. And here we're dealing with, you can really see erosional and colluvial material from the tops of the mountains here. You can really see what the farm that I was dealing with. So my next shot is 2018. And just if I didn't mention it, this is a town called Hajigabul. Yes, I know it took me a long time to understand how to pronounce that. So you can see in 2018, the center pivots were installed. A total of, a total of 49 pivots. And we'll go a little bit further. Actually, I'm wrong. So here is in 2019 when I went to visit. So we had 76 pivots irrigating 13,700 acres, which roughly equates to about 5,600 hectares. So the problem, why was I brought out there? Just like I said, our valley pivots were getting stuck. They were getting stuck going around. And increased gearbox failure, while our competitors' pivots on different farms were operating with minimal issues. So I'm going to back up a screen. The farmer is looking to expand in this area here. So of course, we had the potential of maybe losing sales to a competitor because our pivots were not functioning like the other competitors' pivots were. I didn't have a chance to, there's no soil pits for me to look at. You know, didn't go out there with too much equipment, but I was able to look at a soil profile from an erosion cut. If you know, a lot of us soil scientists, we find anywhere we can a road cut, anything where we can see soils that are exposed to look at. It's who we are. We need to look and understand it. So here is the soils that I was dealing with. I had one chance to find a profile face. So you can see halfway down through is where our AP is, or have an abrupt change between our AP and lower horizons. See a lot of calcium buildup, a lot of salt. Infiltration is slow. Infiltration is slow. So as I move through here, you can see, you know, we did have, and this is in October. So we are drying the soils up for harvest of the corn and then waiting to plant our winter forage. So again, we had gearboxes that are failing and pivots getting stuck. So you can see here, we have some wheel track indentations with ponding. This is what I'm first noticing when I get out there. Another, you could see that they're drying it up, but you can see evidence of ponding and wheel tracks that are making ruts. I got to go down into a lower area here, and you can see in the alfalfa field, I have ponding, and you can see that the soil is building up on these wheels. And this is the first indication that I saw. It's soils that are creating these gearboxes to burn up. You know, it's not the gearboxes themselves. If it was, we'd have problems all around the world with our gearboxes. These are I found out to be very heavy clays. Once they're wetted up, boy, they stick. And you cannot, just like when you walk through clays with your boots, they stick to the bottom of your boots. These things were sticking to the wheels, binding up, working their way into the gearboxes and making them fail. Here's a nice picture of what it looks like. And if you can imagine these on a 5 to 10% slope, these rutted up wheel tracks are like a water slide. Any water that gets stuck in them across the whole field will channel down to the lowest area of the field and just build up in ponds. Some of these areas in these fields had a foot of water in the bottom of these fields because of all the water. I'm going to say like the pool at the bottom of a water slide. That's where all the water runs to. So, you know, at first I'm like, what's causing it? And for the first couple of days I was there, they never had any of these pivots running because they were drying the soils up for harvest. And so everything, none of the pivots were running, and they were in the middle of their grain harvest. Even these alfalfa fields, I asked them to go turn on the pivots, but they didn't, because I just needed to see them run. So here's a picture of me in one of the cornfields, and yes, the corn is stunted and very stressed. That wasn't part of my job to go out there and fix that. Oh, I was chomping at the bit to. but it wasn't part of my job. But what this shows is what I want to focus on is these, we call them boom backs. You can see these, I'm going to say they're pipes that reach behind the wheel. So in this instance, we can irrigate the whole field. You never want to spray water on your wheels directly. So this allows us to be able to irrigate right up to the wheels without having to spray water on the wheels. So this pivot, if you could see my mouse, this pivot would run this way. Can you see the mouse? And then so the water would spray behind the wheel. So we can irrigate as much soil as possible. Different areas don't use boom backs. Sometimes we just stop on each side of the wheel and there's a 90-degree pivot or 90-degree nozzle that only sprays inward, so it doesn't spray the wheel. I finally got to see them irrigate a newly planted winter forage crop. And the answer was right in front of me as soon as the water turned on. If you notice, inside here with the water sprinkling, our irrigation rate matches the water infiltration rate. You see 0 ponding in through here. And if you look back over through here, 0 ponding. If you look right behind our wheels, what do you see? I see water being ponded. So if you can imagine that pivot running continuously for 3 days, as they keep going around, that circle keeps going around, that pool of water just follows those wheels all the way across the whole field. And then especially if you're dealing with any type of slope, that water just gushes down those wheel tracks and just makes that water pond, those clay stick and the gearboxes burn up. So actually, it was a pretty simple fix once you understood. I mean, it's soil physics. You have to match your irrigation rate to your soil infiltration rate. And maybe on sandy soils, you wouldn't see that problem. If they would have did distribution uniformity tests on these pivots, it would have shown that they were irrigating too much behind the wheels. So our dealer who designed the pivots and designed the pivot or the sprinkler package used the wrong nozzles for behind the wheels for the boom backs. So a minor change into that to reduce the water behind the wheels, match the infiltration rate, fix the runoff, stop water from collecting onto the wheels, and stop the gearboxes from burning out. So there, it's one of those things. They were trying to treat a tumor with an aspirin, and you're not going to fix it that way. You need to go in there and actually find out what is causing the problem to actually create a solution, or you're just putting patches on a problem that'll never get fixed. So of course, when you're in Azerbaijan, it's just some nice pictures of sheep that are always running through, and sheep herders and different things that you get to see that you see pictures of, but never get to experience firsthand. And Azerbaijan has a lot of natural gas and oil. It's just what is there. They're very prevalent. I had a chance to visit some open flames in a test pit. I'm going to say, you never know. It's, the burning bush you hear about, in biblical times and different things, your mind starts to go. But yeah, you have open flames in test pits. And I've asked my other soil scientists, and I looked at taxonomy. I don't see any subscripts for open flames in a horizon, and I didn't know if NRCS is going to look at that at any time soon. So that was, if anybody has any, ideas of what subscript should be. I saw this one soil scientist one time sent me something that should be the oh poop emoji that you should put in your box there for this subscripts. But I had it, like I said, had a very interesting time, learned a lot about agriculture over in that area, and also, learned a lot about soil, what soil issues can really cause and what the extent could be. And by the way, our competitors' pivots were all on sandy alluvial soils, so it's a reason why their pivots weren't malfunctioning. But we were able to fix the problem and then also be able to convince the farmer out there that our pivots are still worth purchasing and they should be considered for the expansion. That's the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions.
Thanks, Mike. That's really interesting. That was a great detective story for soils and infiltration. So if you have any questions, go ahead and stick them in the chat, or like I said, go ahead, raise your hand. And how long were you there in Azerbaijan?
I was there for a week. The farm was about 150 miles away from where we had a valley dealer there, so I was able to stay there and be safe and, had somebody looking out for me, but I only visited the farm on 3 days.
All right. Looks like we've got a question in the chat too. Question from Jennifer Wood that says, looks like they were planting into tilted soil. Oh, I'm sorry, tilled soil. Are they using no-till equipment in those places?
No, at this point, no-till was not, you can see that farm is brand new. Organic matter is really low. It's, I'm going to say it's not ready for no-till. It is, those soils clump up and they are rock hard. What they found out right now that no-till is not I'm going to say it wasn't available yet, and nor do I think I'm going to use the term it's ready for it. It is very little organic matter right now. That's what they are looking at doing, is building the organic matter in that soil to then be able to change tilling operations.
All right, I think we've got time for one more question if we've got one.
But yes, the guidance or the I'm going to say it's Dave Smith again who left a message. Yes, the video cut out. We fixed it by changing the nozzle packages behind the wheels.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate that. That was a really interesting talk in a different part of the world. All right. Well, I hope everyone else has got back as well. I'm pretty excited about our next talk. Randy Riddle, he's going to be talking to us about the Salton Sea Perimeter Project. Randy has a master's in plant and soil science from Texas Tech and his bachelor's in agronomy from West Virginia. He is currently detailing as the NRCS Senior Regional Soil Scientist from the Special Projects Office. He's also the chairperson for the Urban Soils Focus Team within the NRCS Soil and Plant Science Division. He's done soil survey work in California since 2010, after a brief stint mapping soils in New Jersey and Maryland. And up until recently, he was the MLRA soil survey leader in Templeton, California, with previous work as a soil scientist in Oxnard and Carson. And he's worked on a variety of soil survey projects and initiatives along the Central Coast and Southern California, and is especially interested in human impacts to soils in urban areas. So we're excited to have him here. And Randy, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you. And Hello, everybody. My name is Randy Riddle. I'm soil scientist with our Special Projects Office, and today I'll be speaking about the Salton Sea Perimeter project that we're currently working on within the soil survey. And we're calling this Filling in the Gaps. And you can see some photos here on the right to get an idea of what the landscape looks like along the perimeter of the Salton Sea as the water continues to recede and the baseline lower. I'm trying to advance right now. Hang on 1 second. There we go. All right, so a quick rundown on what we'll discuss today. We're going to start out talking about the geographic location. I'll get a little bit into the geomorphology and the geomorphic history of the Salton Trough and Sink. Then we'll discuss the history of the Salton Sea and its formation, and then we'll get a little bit more into the background about our current project and some of the collaboration with our partners. Continue with some progress with that project. It is an active project, and then we'll finish up by looking at some soil profiles along the perimeter. That's with my mouse, excuse me. All right, so we'll start with the location of the Salton Sea. If you're looking at the map on the right, you can see the sea in approximately the middle of the screen. And then the trough extends in a southeast direction down to the Gulf of California. So the Salton Trough is in the Western Range and irrigated region. This is part of the Basin and Range province of the Intermontane Plateaus. This is part of the Lower Colorado Desert, which is a subset of the Greater Sonoran Desert. And we've already mentioned it. This is an area that's referred to as the Salton Trough. This is part of now MLRA 40, which is our Sonoran Basin and Range. The MLRA is a physiographic region, stands for the major land resource areas that the NRCS breaks out across the country. You can see here with the county overlay, it's primarily in Imperial County, but it also extends up into Riverside. And to give you an idea of the size, it's about 33 miles long, top to bottom, and varies between about 8 and 14 miles, depending on which part of the sea you're looking at. All right, so now we'll talk a little bit about the geomorphic history and the geomorphology, how the trough was formed. On the left here, you can see some of the fault lines and spreading centers that run through the center of the trough. The Salton Trough is what's referred to as a rift valley, and it's spreading due to tectonics. And this is still happening today, that the trough is still spreading. So this is the southern extent of the San Andreas Fault, which is a right lateral fault. If you're unfamiliar with that, that means if you're looking across the fault from either direction, the direction of movement is to the right. So this means on the Pacific Plate, which is on the west side, there's this northwest progression of the plate moving in that direction. In addition to this, there's also the East Pacific Rise, which is a seamount that extends from the central South Pacific Ocean, and it curves up through the Gulf of California and actually extends below the surface, below the Salton Trough, and expresses itself below the ground through these spreading centers as the tectonic activity occurs. The Gulf of California is what's referred to as an oblique rift system. Basically just means that it's not directly perpendicular. There is a little bit of rotation with it. The rifting is estimated to have began about 12 to 15 years ago. And the Gulf would have been filled approximately 5 million years ago. The trough is filled primarily by Colorado River sediments. It's very deep. Along the border, it's approximately 20,000 feet, so it's incredibly deep. There's also more localized inputs from the adjacent mountains, in addition to the Colorado River. Some interesting notes, the Baja Peninsula, the southern edge is spreading faster than the northern margin. Part of this is because you have this north and south oriented, what's referred to as the Peninsular Range, and at its northern margin, it's basically meeting the transverse range, which is east to west. So it creates this hinge point as the plate moves to the northwest. It's part of the reason why just to the north of the map here, that the San Jacinto and San Gorgonio points are very abrupt and steep, and they're the highest points in the area from all this pressure. And the peninsula basically rotates away from the mainland at those points. So it's pretty interesting geologically. Since the trough is a closed basin, especially in the Imperial and Coachella Valley, when water runs in here from the Colorado River, the Salton sink is filled with water, and throughout geologic history, it would have been filled repeatedly to form what's called ancient Lake Kahia. There's some recent geomorphology papers in the area that date the last two major fillings to capacity, or these water high stands, in the 1500s, which is about when the Spanish first explored the area, and a second filling most recently in the early 1700s. The peak elevation for Lake Kahia is approximately 12 meters, about 39 feet. And the bottom of the sink, which is the bottom of the Salton Sea, is about negative 278 feet elevation. If you're driving around the sea, you can see features in the exposed bedrock, especially along Travertine Rock, other places along the Santa Rosa Mountains. And on the eastern side of the sea, there is kind of like a beach escarpment at the water high stand that's visible while you're driving down the road. So if you're looking at the map here, the area in blue is the extent of Lake Kahia. Another interesting note here is just south of the sea, there are some extensive dune systems. And those are believed to be beach remnants and dunes that have developed over time along the margins of Lake Kahia. Also found this interesting as reading a paper, and they estimate that the last two major fillings also corresponded to the most recent surface ruptures in the southern section of the San Andreas Fault. So I thought that was pretty interesting to share with you guys. They did calculate the rate of filling and desiccation of the lake, and they estimated that it was about 15 to 17 years to fill Lake Kahia to capacity when the Colorado River would have diverted north into the sink, and it would have evaporated very quickly at a rate of about 1.5 to 2 meters in surface elevation per year. So that's incredibly fast. If you work out the math, that comes out to like 45 to 60 some years to fully desiccate. That's pretty incredible for such a large area. All right, so now we'll continue talking about the formation of the Salton Sea as we know it today. Many of you may know, or may at least be familiar, that the sea was filled from an engineering levee failure when the water was attempted to be diverted from the Colorado River near Yuma into the Imperial Valley to support agriculture. There were a couple attempts here, if you're looking at the map on the left, to divert the water into the Imperial Canal. Initially, just on the California side of the border, and that heading failed. So then they moved just south of the border, and that heading failed. And then they moved about 4 miles south to another heading along, I forget the name of the little island that is drawn there on the map, but they created another heading there, and that's where the major breach occurred in 1905 after there was heavy rainfall and high flows. And it breached for about 2 years before they were able to redivert the Colorado River back into its main channel. Over time, the Salton seawater level finally restabilized at approximately 1920, and that water level was sustained from irrigation runoff primarily, which has since then been sustaining the level of the Salton Sea, and it's managed by what's known as the Imperial Irrigation District. All right, so today there's a new canal that feeds the Imperial Valley through the Imperial Irrigation District. It was constructed by the Bureau of Reclamation and opened in 1942. It's entirely in the United States, and it crosses the Algodones dunes. There's some information here about the dimensions. It's pretty big. Runs about 80 miles It's about 120 to 150 feet wide, 7 to 20 feet deep. So it's pretty shallow throughout most of its area. And the total drop is about 175 feet. You can see on top, there's a map of the All-American Canal, and it starts at the Imperial Dam just north of Yuma, and then it connects eventually with the Alamo and New Rivers and the irrigation system in Imperial Valley. So this brings us to the Salton Sea today. So maybe wondering, why do we even care about this? Some folks may be more aware of what's happening in the area than others, but essentially the water level is receding, and it's exposing this area of exposed shoreline or playas along its margin. Since there's been about 100 years of runoff from ag and other sources, the salinity has greatly increased, and it's over double that of the Pacific Ocean. We'll touch on that again in a few slides. Most of the fish have died. That's been in the news quite a bit. And there's mostly brine shrimp left. And there's also some other protected species in some of the canals and certain parts of the sea that are left. It's also considered critical habitat for migratory birds, and there is a wildlife refuge along the southern part of the area. All right, a little bit more project background. So how did this happen? I don't know the exact date, maybe 10, 15 years ago, there was approximately 20% reallocation of the water from the Imperial Irrigation District, so that's the IID on here, to nearby cities in San Diego. And I wrote Los Angeles kind of generally, but I believe it's more of the Inland Empire. So that's the inland area of the greater Los Angeles area. Even after this reallocation of the water level is still dropping. And I've seen various numbers here. I used 1 foot per year per a USGS report. Although we did hear from some partners recently that the sea is receding faster than anticipated. So not sure exactly what the real number is, but it's still dropping, I guess is the message here. So why do we care about this? Now we have this exposed playa. There's fine particulate dust that is in the air. So there's air quality issues. There's also been this accumulation of pesticides and other toxins over time from the runoff. Those generally collect in the deeper parts of the sea, but they're also present in the near shore exposed areas now. So really we're talking about air quality and how to mitigate the impacts of that. And had meant to mention this at the beginning of the presentation, but anything I mentioned here, the NRCS really has no official position on any of the strategies, the proposals, and the methods used to address these issues. I just wanted to give people an idea of what we're working on in the area, and while we complete the inventory to create a soil survey. So the photo on the left is a picture from a field week I believe it was in April or May, earlier this spring, but you can get an idea of what these exposed shorelines look like. There's a lot of salt crustacean at the surface, and you're actually looking at what was a small beach on the left side where the tire tracks are moving through. So that would have been a shoreline, at least for some period of time. All right, some more background. Since the water is receding, we do have this soils data gap in the soil survey along these exposed playas. There is some active dust mitigation projects being done in the area, and you can see a photo here of some surface roughage. Basically, these berms are created perpendicular to the dominant direction of the wind to knock down the wind energy and to reduce the dust that is projected into the air. There's also other methods such as surface objects to break up the wind and revegetation and things like that. And you can also see in this picture, there's some abandoned barges and other duck blinds and things like that kind of scattered around in the playas. It's kind of an interesting place. More background about the project. Current salinity in Salton Sea is approximately 74,000 milligrams per liter. For reference or comparison, the Pacific Ocean salinity is around 35,000. So get you an idea of really how high the salinity is in the sea. There's been several proposals on how to handle this, how to basically dilute the water down below 70,000 milligrams per liter, which is basically thought to be the threshold to support certain protected species, such as the desert pupfish here and some of the others that are listed here in the list. The proposals I've read, the targets seem to be anywhere between 40,000 and 70,000 milligrams per liter in salinity, may be considered acceptable. There's been most recently in the news a proposal to restore the sea by importing seawater from the Gulf of California across the border and then basically dilute the sea. There's just recently, this stuff is all very dynamic because it's happening now. A report came out about a month ago that suggested that was impractical due to costs and other logistics by a review panel. And there's a variety of other recommendations, such as allowing the sea level to restabilize at its current level. Things like creating evaporation ponds and disposing of the brine. Desalinization facilities have been proposed, a variety of dust suppression projects. Some of those are already underway. Revegetation of the exposed playas and other methods to modernize and create more efficient irrigation methods that are used in the Imperial Valley, since most of the area or much of it is still flood irrigated. And then it runs to this system of irrigation canals and eventually runs back into the sea. So there's a lot of things on the table. Time will tell what the eventual outcome will be and how things will be handled. So this brings us up to the soil survey project. And we were contacted by the Bureau of Land Management about completing the soil survey. The Imperial Valley in the ag lands was mapped back in the 1970s. And now that it was basically mapped up to the Salton Sea. And then now that the water is receding, that leaves us with the soils data gap. So our interest is completing the soil survey in that area and in the shallow water areas and near shore areas that are projected to be exposed within the next, I don't know, sometime in the 1940s, maybe 20, 25 years from now. We are collaborating with Formation Environmental and Mark Roberson, who I actually saw, Mark, your name on the list here. So thanks for joining us and been great to work with. We acquired a substantial data set from Formation Environmental. We're really grateful for that. You can see here the data points of the location of the cores. And we have about 1,450 soil cores, and in our current project area, there are about 665 cores in our phase 1 area, which I'll show you right now. So the area in orange here is our phase 1 targeted project. And you can see the density of the cores that have been described and sampled in the area. This is a tremendous data set for us to work from, and we're really grateful to have something like this available to us. This is about a 25,000 acre area that we're focusing on right now with this first part of the project, and 665 cores in here, and both the submerged and the exposed playas are a great start. So this is a 2-year project for us. We're just getting into the second year of the project right now. So quick rundown on the data that we're using. There were high density transects taken and various playas and in the shallow water areas. There's stratified sampling by depth with lab data that provides us with particle size analysis, electrical conductivity, EC 1 to 5, which is traditionally used in the subaqueous areas. We have exchangeable sodium percentage, saturation percentage, and basically a presence of calcium carbonate. So that's the lab data. There also are soil profile descriptions at nearly all the cores, I believe all of them actually. And they want to make a note that the particle size data, I because of the salinity, I assume there were some dispersion issues using hydrometer from the lab. So they had to switch over to ASD, which stands for automated, I'm sorry, I spelled that wrong, spectroradiometer, to scan for the particle size distribution. And that data set seems to be working pretty well. We also have the bathymetry, which is the floor or the bottom of the Salton Sea, and that's in a 1 foot contour. I was able to convert that into a rasterized DEM and create some terrain derivatives using that to map the landforms in the submerged part of the sea. Here's an example of some of the scans here. We have a location with a high resolution image of one of the soil cores, and there's a corresponding depth plot with the particle size distribution on the right. This is a great way to look at the data from the cores. So what is NRCS doing with all this information? We're currently reorganizing the data into a soil survey format at our site and point level. And then we're going to correlate to existing soil series as best we can in the area. If there are no fits, then we'll set up new soils for the area to best represent these places. I'm also doing a pre-map in the area. We have a pretty good landform map that's being developed. We're still working on it at the moment, mapping out the landforms in the playas and in the submerged areas. And we're going to heavily rely on the historical data as much as we can. In this picture here, you can see a Giddings probe. This is when we met with Formation Environmental, so this is their equipment. They have a pretty cool UTV with the Giddings probe mounted on the back. And now we're going to wrap up looking at a few soil profiles. Just 2 slides here, and then we'll wrap things up. I know I'm running over. This is along the southwestern shore at a place called Clubhouse Beach. You can get an idea of the landscape here on the left. The profile in the center is at that site that we're looking at on the left. And you can see there's some recent deposits from the Salton Sea with also some reworking for wind after the sea has receded. And below that, you can see the gray gley soil, which is likely from the Lake Kahia lacustrine deposits. I did add some data from a nearby core with lab data. So can approximate that the EC in the upper part is about 40 and about 70 in the lower part in the gray soil. ESP, give you an idea, is about 20 in the upper part and 50 in the lower part. So these are what we call salic horizons, which are very high salinity. Profile on the right is nearby in a very slight depression, and you can see some of the desiccation cracking at the surface. There was a really thin cemented layer forming at the surface at about 5 to 10 centimeters. We did try to slake that in acid and water, and it did not slake. So it's potentially like a Durapan that's forming at the surface just from the wetting and drying. You can see some stratification in old surfaces here at about 40 centimeters. There's a thin surface, more deposits, and then you get down into the Lake Kahia lacustrine deposits down at the bottom of the profile where it turns gray. Again here, one more profile to talk about. This is at the northern part of the Salton Sea. You can see what the landscape here looks like on the left, and profile here in the center. And you can see this alternating pattern of these higher energy flooding event deposits with these lacustrine deposits. And you can see the dispersion from the smearing from the salinity in that, and then more bands of high flow alluvium scattered in the profile. If you keep digging down, you'll see this alternation of these gray layers with these more yellowish orange coarser layers. So I do want to pull up one of the soil cores with the depth plots to the right, and you can see how that corresponds pretty well. This actually matched up pretty well with our description in the area. So we're able to use our descriptions and the data from the cores to verify the soil components and look at the properties on these areas. That's going to be our approach for developing the soil survey in the area. So So many thanks to our partners, and here's some references where I pulled some of this information. I have some pictures of us out in the field here, and Mark Roberson in the left picture, along with myself and some other folks from the Special Projects Office. It's Greg Taylor and Rob Tunstead. And I want to thank you all very much. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and we'll leave you with some folk art, which is what the area is known for.
Thank you, Randy. That was fabulous. We've got a few minutes for questions. If anybody has one, like, you know, the drill, raise your hand or put it in the chat. I've got one to kick us off real quick. Do you know at the current rate that the sea level is dropping, or the level of water in the Salton Sea is dropping, if we continue under current conditions, how long will the lake hold water?
Well, the USGS report is reporting that it's dropping at about a foot per year right now. The water level will restabilize just based on how much runoff is replenishing the sea. Not only do you have the reduced allocation through IID, but we're also in a drought, so there's just less water feeding the area from the Colorado River. So there's a few factors in why it's receding like it is right now.
All right, I see a hand raised. Sharon Beans.
What is the likelihood they'll do revegetation? And you know what maybe halophytes they might use, like Allenrophia or Atriplex species? Any information on that?
Well, I can't speak for the consultants that are doing that, but I do know they are working on re-veg. I think that's the long-term goal.
More shrubs or grasses, or I think maybe
exactly. Well, there are some shrubs that are being reestablished in the area that seem tolerant. I know Mark's on right now. I know it's unusual to ask Mark to chime in on that if they feel comfortable, but I
sure.
speak for the consultant on their methods.
Can you hear me, Randy? Okay.
Yes. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, sure. So we have two different approaches out there depending on what the texture is like. The surface roughening that Randy showed earlier, we apply in areas that are heavier textured, and then where we can't implement surface roughening, that's when we go for the vegetation. And Allenrophia is the star bush down there. So you're dead on that one.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we probably just have time for one more. Got a few in the chat. Randy, if you want to look at those and pick your favorite.
I'll mute. Sorry about that. I'm not sure if you guys can see the chat or if you're looking at the pictures right now, but I apologize if I'm blocking your view. I'm reading them right now. Ron Taskey is asking about soil survey interpretations, whether or not we're relying on the existing interpretations or if we're developing new ones for this project. Right now, we're relying on what's available. And there are some coastal zone subaqueous soil type interps that are pretty new that may work on this data set, but we're not developing interpretations in addition to the mapping.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Randy. Really appreciate your presentation. Thanks to our other speakers as well. It's great to be able to talk about soils and have everyone together. Our next portion of this meeting will be moving into our PSSAC Business Meeting. Before we do, I'd like to thank Ascent Environmental and Jamie, who is being our host for this and helping us to run a professional meeting and manage all the Zoom intricacies. This is the second year in a row that Ascent has sponsored, and we're just really appreciative. So thank you for your time and for being here. We'll have the recording of the meeting posted up on our website next week. so that if you wanted to go back and watch a presentation, or if you had questions about something that was in a slide, you can pull that up and look through it again or share it with anyone else you think might be interested. I would encourage you, if you're interested, to stay for the business portion of our meeting. We're very excited to be talking a bit about our Santa Cruz Island trip next year, which Dave Smith will be talking about that one. So it's all very exciting. I encourage you to stay if you're interested, but you're free to go if you'd like to skip this next portion of the talk. So I'll give myself, I know we're a few minutes behind, but I think we can move quickly through some of our discussion items. I don't have our agenda that I can share easily with you to see. So I will just run through the items on the agenda real quick as a summary so that you can know what we're planning to talk about. The first item is to welcome our president-elect and our new members. We'll then move on to our scholarship recipients for this year. Talk about general membership in PSSAC, and then we'll have a presentation from Dave about our Santa Cruz Island trip. So that's the agenda for our business meeting. I'll kick it off with reintroducing myself. I'm Rachel Kozlowski. I am this year's president, heavily supported by our executive leadership team and Mary, of course. We'd like to welcome Dave Smith, who is our president-elect. Incoming. He's been a tremendous help already in all of his work supporting the Santa Cruz Island meeting. Dave is, he was PSSAC president and executive committee member back in the 90s. And he's worked for NRCS for almost 40 years, and being a field soil scientist, soil survey project leader, California state soil scientist, regional leader and soil survey division director, and so many other things. He also worked in DC prior to retiring from the NRCS in 2017. And since then, he's been splitting his time between Annapolis and Goleta. And he's worked part-time as an advisor to Oliver Wyman Company, Hydronos Labs, and the Center for Spatial Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Working on bringing soil scientists and agricultural and natural resources management to various projects. And as I said before, Dave is spearheading the Santa Cruz Island trip next year, and we're just really excited to have him and grateful for his leadership. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. Thank you.
So we also had some new members joining PSSAC since our last year. That includes Valerie Bullard, Justin Ono, Rose Kronberg, Olivia Peters, and Kelsey Fenn, who's a student member. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. So one of the things that you all contribute to when you pay your membership dues is the option to contribute to our scholarship fund. And with our scholarship fund, we've been able to provide some significant scholarships for students in California who are studying soils and natural resources. So this year, we were able to give $2,000 scholarships to students who are working to get their education in soil scientist and soil science and natural resources. And our two winners for this year's scholarships are Miguel Ramos from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo and Hunter Mortensen from Cal Poly Humboldt. So we asked our two scholarship winners to give us a short blurb about their bio, and I'll go ahead and read those for you now. Miguel Ramos is a fourth-year student at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, an environmental earth and soil scientist, concentrating in hydrology, and he's also minoring in indigenous studies. He grew up in the Central Valley in Modesto, and he's a first-generation college student. Some of his involvement on campus includes being part of the soil judging team, Latinos in agriculture, the Educational Opportunity Program, and the Latinx Cultural Association. We were both, well, all three of us that were reviewing our scholarship applications were just really impressed with Miguel's application, and we're very, very happy to be able to offer this scholarship. Miguel, are you on? Hey.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, congratulations. Good luck. Our other scholarship awardee is Hunter Mortensen. He couldn't be here today because he is en route to a soil taxonomy class field trip. But he sent us an entire letter thanking us for this scholarship, and it's not very long, but I'll go ahead and I'll just read that here. This is from Hunter. PSSAC members, soil scientists, and soil enthusiasts. My name is Hunter Mortensen, and as an awardee of the 2022 PSSAC scholarship, I was asked to provide a brief bio for my introduction here at the annual meeting. I've never been good at giving personal bios. I always found them to be too ambiguous. So instead of anything remarkable, I'll give you a cliche. I was born in Roseville, California, lived in the neighboring town of Granite Bay all my life until I was accepted to Humboldt State in 2020, after which I picked up my things and moved to Arcata for the spring 2022 semester. I've been here in Arcata ever since, learning and following a deep urge to study the natural sciences, acquire a degree, and help society, help the earth in whatever way I can. I have passions for learning and education, the outdoors, the study of the mind, backpacking, walking, grasses and other plants, the soil science, of course, and most recently added to my list, doing nothing. I unfortunately cannot be here with you all today, even virtually, because as this is being read to you, I'm on my way to Susanville with my soil taxonomy class led by Dr. Susan Marshall. My peers and I are on our way to investigate various soils and dig many soil pits in an effort to learn the complex and interesting process of soil genesis and soil classification. However, while I have the floor, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the PSSAC officers for keeping this organization alive and active, the PSSAC members for your support, the donors for funding my dreams and passions, and all the soil scientists and soil enthusiasts who are making life's work. They're making it a life's work to study the earth and improve our relationship to it. I'm sincerely honored and privileged to be one of this year's recipients of the 2022 PSSAC scholarship. With a grateful heart, Hunter. So that was longer than usual, but I just wanted to share it. Yeah, we had a comment in the chat that we had 17 applicants. So it was great. It was nice. We had a really strong pool of applicants. Joel, our past president, and Phil and I went round and round sorting out the details of some very, very qualified candidates. Really impressive group of folks that submitted applications. And I'd just like to also say that this is a really neat thing we're able to do as PSSAC, is just support young soil scientists who are making their way. So thank you everyone for your contributions to our scholarship fund, and please keep it up. It's great to be able to support these folks. All right, the next item is our membership report. And Mary, are you good taking over this one?
What did you want me to share? Membership report. We sent out 70 dues notices and I've received 51. We have 51 current members paid through date.
Yeah. And one of the things that Mary was hoping that we might be able to discuss with members is if anyone has any ideas of what we can do to keep our membership up. Those membership dues help us keep the organization afloat and together, and planning for our annual meetings, which I know is probably the reason why most people will join. So does anybody have any comments or thoughts? No. We suspect that our struggle to get our memberships to stay active might be just related to COVID and the fact that we haven't been able to have in-person meetings. We're really looking forward to our in-person meeting next year. But one of the perks of paying your membership is that you get a discount on your meeting registration. So we're not able to offer that when we're having virtual meetings. And although the virtual meetings have been great as a chance to bring more people that might not usually be able to be involved, there's a downside to it as well, just not being in person. Anybody have any other thoughts or comments?
I guess this is Dave Smith. I'll just throw out a comment. I mean, I hope that PSSA is awesome and it supports soil science in California and our soil science community. And
Oh, we lost you, Dave. Oh no. Well, we lost Dave. If he comes back, we'll get him to tell us what he was thinking. Is there any other comments on general membership or anything that we can do to make it more meaningful? We've got a comment in the chat that there could be more opportunities to recruit more student members, especially at the graduate level, through just more publicization of PSSAC. And that's good. We're not great at tooting our own horn or getting out there. How do you feel about the virtual meetings in general? Is this something that we should consider continuing along with our field trips, or should we just go back to our one meeting a year? I see one comment that the virtual meetings have been useful. I know that we've been able to engage some students and some other folks that haven't been able to otherwise come to our meetings. Go ahead, Garrett.
I'm not currently a member, but I'm going to join. I think the virtual meetings really lower the bar for people to be able to participate. I mean, it gets rid of travel. It gets rid of a lot of some of the barriers that might keep people from being involved. So I don't know, some sort of short format off-season meeting, but it definitely makes it a lot easier for people to attend that might not be able to drive or have the time that it takes to go to Sacramento or to go to Santa Barbara or wherever.
Yeah. I know the long driving time makes it tough. And yeah, sometimes it can be hard to get the money together.
Rachel, you want to share that some professors were able to have the meeting coincide with their class and they had their whole class join in today. That was pretty neat.
Yeah, that was great. I love that, being able to share some. And I think our speakers were great. It was a really great chance to be able to talk about a really diverse group of soil issues with a lot of people we wouldn't usually have. So I agree. Oh, Dave's back. He says his bandwidth is too bad to talk, but. Oh, Megan gave extra credit. Nice. Thanks, Megan. All right, well, I don't really have anything else to talk about related to membership. And if you have any other thoughts, please email Mary or myself or Phil or Dave, any of the leadership crew. And we'd love to talk more about what we can do to stay relevant, to get people to stay excited about PSSAC and pay their dues. Let's see. All right, Dave says he's able to talk about Santa Cruz. Are you able to share your screen, Dave, and talk about the field trip? If not, I think Jamie has something too. So our next item is really just to talk about our 2023 meeting, which is going to be in Santa Cruz Island. And we're, as many of you know, we were working on this for several years and it didn't happen because of COVID complications. And it's a once in a lifetime trip and we're really excited about it. Dave, if you're able, you can take it from here.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Fingers crossed that my internet will stay stable. It's weird here in Goleta and Santa Barbara, California. You'd think there'd be good internet, but it kind of goes in and out. So I'm going to leave my camera off and not screen share right now. Maybe I'll try it in a second. But so as Rachel said, I think it's really exciting, interesting opportunity we have to host a PSSAC field meeting on Santa Cruz Island in the Channel Islands off of Southern California coast. And this is something that got started, more than a year ago by people that I should give credit to. I think it was really Ben Faber with UC Extension and David Kelly and Roy Schleiman. And I don't know if I'm missing anybody. I wasn't present, but when I agreed to run for office and become president-elect, part of my job is to help be a coordinator of together the next field meeting. So I'm stepping up and trying to do a good job of that. But really, Ben and David and Roy have all get the credit, and they're helping me put this agenda together too. So anyway, Santa Cruz Island, if you don't already know, is really a unique place to visit. It's it's a rare ecosystem. Some people kind of think of it as the Galapagos of islands of the U.S., from an island ecology point of view. It has such an interesting, history with indigenous people. I mean, the Arlington Springs Man archaeological site goes back at least 13,000 years. They found that on Santa Rosa Island, one of the Channel Islands. So the Chumash people and their ancestors have been living there for probably tens of thousands of years. So that's very interesting. And then there's the last 100 or so years of land use of people grazing cattle and sheep and that kind of thing on the island is quite interesting as well. Not to mention the geologic history of this place is incredible with, plate tectonics, the plate margin tectonic history, the faulting, the sort of California borderland terrains that can be talked about by people that are knowledgeable about this. There's offset drainages there. There's schist, there's Monterey shale, and there are volcanics all on the island with the soils that form in those three different differing lithologies that are all jumbled together in this plate tectonic island arc environment. So we're really lucky that Roy Schleiman, I think, brought Nicholas Pinter into the discussion. And he's a professor. Dr. Pinter's a professor at UC Davis. I think actually a Schleiman endowed professor there. And he has done a lot of research on the island, and he has graciously agreed to be one of our main tour guides, and has given, we're still in the process of formulating the field stop agenda, but Nicholas is going to be very helpful with that. Jay Reddy is the UC field station director there, and he's very supportive and working closely with us. Another possible speaker is Lynn Gamble, who is an archaeologist, researcher emeritus now out of UC Santa Barbara that's done a lot of work archaeologically there. The NRCS completed a soil survey there some 10 or 15 years ago, and there's about 10 soil characterization pits that I'm working with Jay. Some pits field stop sites, so we should be able to get into the soils. In order to do that, though, the University of California is reevaluating their archaeological policy right now. We're probably going to have a Chumash elder with us. In order to re-excavate the pits, Jay is saying we probably have to have somebody from the Chumash tribe with us, which is awesome. Her name is Eleanor Fishborn. She's an elder with the Chumash, and so we can invite her as a speaker too to talk about the indigenous history and indigenous land use on the island, which I think will be a pretty amazing facet to blend in. Maybe with some archaeologists talking about the research, with the geologists talking about geomorphology and the plate tectonics, and then a soil scientist digging into the soils. So it's going to be really unique, interesting opportunity. I'm throwing my sales pitch at you. We're probably going to have a room. Going to have to, just to give you a feel, we haven't worked out all the budget yet, but we're looking at, there's only like 4 or 5 private rooms. Uh-oh, my internet's saying unstable. Can you still
You're
hear me?
okay. We can still hear you.
Okay, so 4 or 5 private rooms that we may are invited speakers. We may put them in there, but if there are a few selected people that want, pay the extra to use those private rooms, that's a possibility. There's only 4 or 5. They have queen size beds in them. Then there's a bunkhouse that has 14 lower bunks and 11 upper bunks, and then there is there's ample outdoor space for anybody that wants to bring a tent and camp and sleep outside. So we're all going to have to bring our bedrolls, whether we're in the bunkhouse or we're outside. We're still trying to work out. Mary Reed's been amazing, awesome, helpful in helping organize all these thoughts, but we're still trying to work out whether we're going to try to self-cater or hire a caterer. And that's going to make a big difference on the cost. So everybody hang on to their hat here, or hang on to your seat. Right now, our estimated cost, if we self-catered, is looking around $500 per person, including our registration and all the support to have vehicles on the island, to get transported out to the island, to have the food, to do the things we need to do, to put together our field guide. $500 a person in a tent space, around these are rough estimates, around $700 a person in the bunkhouse, and around $900 per person if we were to be in a private room. If we hire a caterer, which I favor us doing, because it would make it a lot easier than all of us trying to organize into teams and cook our meals and do our thing, we're probably looking at $300 or $400 per person more to do the catering. So anyway, we're ranging anywhere from around $500 to $1,200 or $1,400 per person, depending on how you want to sleep to be able to do this. But keep in mind, it's 5 full days of including lodging and food and an amazing, scientific field tour and the esprit de corps and camaraderie that we'll all have together, talking soils on the island. So we'd be bouncing around in 4-wheel drive Jeeps. We're going to need to have, some drivers, and we're going to work all that stuff out too. I'm probably forgetting a bunch. Let me try to screen share really quick, just to throw a quick map up. Oh, shucks. What just happened? Just to show you a quick little view of what we're talking about. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
No, I'm trying to make it bigger. What the heck? Here we go. Okay, so this is just a little image from a screenshot from Google Maps. And I was going to show Google Earth Live and kind of zoom in and zoom out and show you a little bit more, but I'm worried that I'll lose the connection. So we would land here at this ferry landing, 4-wheel drive into the field station, or not 4-wheel drive, they're dirt roads. The UC people would meet us there with vehicles. We go to the field station where would be our staging area. And then what we're going to do is we're going to field tour out on, we'll have 3 full days and 2 half days of field stops. And, this whole end of the island over here, the west end is all Monterey Shale. And then the fault basically runs right down the middle of the island, almost below our road in this little valley that you can see there. And it's all volcanics on one side and schist on the other. And so lots of fun looking at the geology and the geomorphology in the soils. There's a lot of sea level rise stuff. There are marine terraces, the archaeology that goes with the marine terraces. Anyway, I won't keep repeating. I'm just trying to get everybody amped up because it's going to be fun. And I think, one other thing I want to say is it's going to be April 19 to 23. That's the 5-day window that we have with the university. So we have the field station for the departure point will be Ventura, California, Ventura Harbor, with a group called Island Packers that takes people out to the Channel Islands. And I need to also back up. Of course, Santa Cruz Island is part of the Channel Islands National Park, and about 2/3 of the island is owned and run by the Nature Conservancy, which has it as a preserve, and another 1/3 of it is national park. And we'll be doing stops on both Nature Conservancy land and national park lands. And then, of course, the UC Santa Barbara leads a research station that's on the island that cooperates very with both NPS and TNC. And so we'll ferry out. We're going to leave, like, 9 in the morning on the 19th and get out to the island around noon. And I think that's a Thursday, a Wednesday, then a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, all day in the field. And then Sunday, we will have a half day and ferry back, and that'll be the 5 days. So it will involve people having to travel and probably get down to Ventura the night before we take off on the 19th. And I'm going way long. I'm just excited about this, but I'll just stop there and see if there's any discussion or any input, questions, whatever.
Thanks, Dave. It's great. It's great to be excited about it. It's going to be phenomenal. Does anybody have any thoughts or suggestions or questions for Dave? Dave, I know you probably said this, but I think your sound cut out right at the minute. But do you know what our total number of spaces that we'll have for participants?
Oh, that'd be, I think we're going to cap it at right around 40. We may be able to go a little bit higher if a lot of people are willing to camp in tents. Our limitation is going to be, there's only so much shower space,
Mm-hmm.
And the vehicle, how many vehicles we can get people into, I think are going to be our limitations. But around 40. And we hope to put a registration announcement out as soon as possible. I know Mary would like to have us do it before the end of the calendar year, prior to Christmas. And we're working real hard to try to be able to get that out. I mean, I think we will be able to do that. So you should hear before Christmas time, see a meeting announcement, be able to get ready to register.
Ron's ready.
Can you hear me? This is David Kelly.
Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah. What a bargain. What a bargain. Seriously, at the highest number, that's a bargain. And I don't know if we have a minimum number we have to meet, but if the money is this is better than a vacation, and it's not even any golf fees, So I just hope that I'm just tickled that Dave has taken this on. It's just incredible. And of course, Ben had so much to do with it at the very start too, that we're actually, looks like we're going, which is not to say that Mary doesn't have something to do with it, and Roy and everybody else, but what a bargain this will be, and what an opportunity to see stuff that just makes my teeth hurt. So.
Yeah, I think it's pretty great.
And Ben, you've been out there is Ben still on? I think Ben was on. Ben, you've been out there.
Yep.
You might make a comment about just how fabulous it is.
Well, it's not Los Angeles. You see this smog drifting in from LA, and you go, God, how do people live like that? And it's just it's a miniature California. It's basically got a coast range and a Sierra range and a Central Valley, and it's got a river that runs through it. And boy, you could live forever out there. Some people do.
Pretty good life.
And I would still add that the people that we've been able to line up, not me, but Roy and Dave and everybody, it's just, it's quite an opportunity to tag into somebody who's had a lifetime of experience out there on all the things in the soils and geology. The soil geomorphic relationships particularly are just incredible. They're just going to be like nothing else.
Rachel, it sounds very similar to the tour you conducted a few years ago of the down off Santa Barbara.
I think I missed that one. Somebody who has more.
Catalina Island, which was a wonderful tour outside the accommodations, which were a little bit plush. I agree with you, David. Sounds like a real great opportunity.
Yeah, and you know, Catalina Island's cool with Avalon and everything, but Santa Cruz Island is really nobody there, or nobody living there. I mean, indigenous people lived there for thousands and thousands of years, and apparently a lot of them. And we'll hear more about that, I think. But you know, it's this pristine environment. It had 100 years of pretty heavy land use, which we'll be able to talk about and see the impacts of that. But you know, it's really, you know, as Richard Howard says, there's endemic birds out there, and you know, it's just an amazing place. So we've all got to go. This is going to be fun.
I don't think we'll have trouble filling spots. Yeah.
I'd like to have to resort to a lottery to fill it up. We may have to do that.
We may have to. And you know, we talked a little bit about how we might be able to provide some spots for students as well, knowing that the cost hurdle will be larger for folks that are not currently professionally working. When wanting to find that balance between space for our members who have been working on this and so excited for so long, and also able to encourage younger soil scientists to be able to get excited and passionate about this amazing place too. So that's one of the challenges that we're looking at.
Well, I think we have a very healthy scholarship fund that this could be entirely appropriate to supplement some registration and expenses for students, and I'd be all in favor of it. And again, I think we need to be limiting the number of people who go out there, just because it's going to be such a fabulous trip.
Yeah. Well, that's I think that is the end of our business meeting. Other than just wanted to thank everyone for coming, for supporting our virtual meetings, and just for being present and a chance to engage, even though we're not face to face. Yeah, keep an eye out for the meeting announcement for the Santa Cruz Island trip. And please let us know if you've got any thoughts or comments. If anyone else has any other business or any item that you wanted to discuss related to PSSAC before we close this portion of the meeting.
It's so great to see everybody. I mean, I haven't seen some of these faces since the Pleistocene, you know?
It's great. Yeah. And we'll also have, we'll keep the Zoom channel open. Jamie will probably leave us, but the rest of us can hang out and talk if you want to just connect with any familiar faces that you see. The Zoom meeting will be open for a little while afterwards, so feel free to chat. If there's nothing else, then we'll call it quits. And thanks, everyone. It's been great. It's been such a pleasure to see your faces. Thank you for presenting our speakers. You know what I mean. And we'll see you next year.